You haven't slept now really for 48 hours. You're kind of sitting there upstairs in your bed that looks like this, with your partner, and you've got the light on because you can't bear to turn it off, because you've got no idea what's going to happen. All sorts of weird stuff has been happening throughout this house for the last couple of days. And this room is odd. This room is really strange. You'd already heard before you came here a whole bunch of stories about this house, but you'd heard in particular about this young couple who had died here, and their child. And when you came into this room, you found some things in this room. You found wedding photos of this couple. You found a dried bouquet of flowers from the wedding. You found the crib there with the nameplate Gwendolyn carved in wood in it. And you've heard things. You've heard a baby crying, no obvious source. You've heard an argument through a wall, muffled, male voice, female voice, something about money, but you've never found the people behind it. And you could swear you heard a gunshot. There was blood in the bathroom, blood splatter. The staff have cleared it up now, but you've no idea where it came from. And now, 3 o'clock in the morning, out of your head, really, with sleep deprivation, bang, from the corridor outside. And the door is flung open. And there's the woman from the photographs. She's wearing a black dress, her eyes are running with tears, makeup streaming. Under her arm is a bundle, it's the baby. And in her hand is a pistol, a revolver. And she runs into the room, distraught, looking around at the people following her, but there's nobody following her, but she clearly sees people. She runs across the room, kind of ignoring you, but the gun's kind of waving past you. And she runs over to the window, and she pulls open the window, and she throws the baby out. First floor window. Now, at this point, as a player, because you are a player, you're playing a character in a 1950s event, you're taking on this persona, if you can separate yourself from the game because you're so scared, maybe you won't, but as a player, you can go, oh, I get what's going on. It makes perfect sense. The baby is a dummy. Everything's going to be all right. It's fine. And then she jumps out of the window. And by the time you get to the window and look down, there's nothing there. No baby, no woman, nothing. So let's kind of start off with how we did that bit. And it's actually the least interesting bit of the whole thing to me. This was a video taken during a rehearsal for that little bit. Here's a stunt woman, Kira, who likes jumping out of windows. It doesn't look like a big drop, but actually when you take away the boxes, it's quite a big drop. Stunt people love jumping on boxes. And we knew at the bottom, when the baby came to the window, that was the signal that she committed to jump. And she jumps. And then it was a lot faster in the kind of 3 o'clock in the morning version. But without even checking whether she was okay, we were supposed to pick the whole lot up and disappear it off. And at the time we actually did it, it took about 8 seconds flat to get it out of the line of view of the window. It was pitch dark, obviously, and the sound that it made being dragged across was covered by people screaming, so that was fine. So yeah, that's what the hell am I talking about? So I'm Ian. I do a bunch of things. Over about the last 25 years, I have been doing this hobby, which I'll talk a lot more about this afternoon. I also am a games programmer, if this will work, by day, do games mechanics for some of these sort of games. By game mechanics, I mean not low-level kind of rendering stuff. I tend to do the kind of verbs the player can use and kind of their experience with the game. I also do game narrative, so story world, writing dialogue, coming up with characters, lore, and the kind of the way that story is delivered to players as they play. Incidentally, one in the middle there is something that Steve Ince has been working on as well, who's talking here tomorrow. And I've also written for books and films. Napoleonic zombie movies and children's books about Cthulhu. So, here's a trailer for something I worked on not that long ago. Is it playing? I think so.
Hello? The hell is this place? How did I get here? It's my sincerest belief that we can go on living. It it really makes you think about what it means to be human.
I mean, if we are able to save even just a small piece of ourselves, why wouldn't we do that?
My name is Simon. Do you know anything about this place?
Oh, you do. Look, I'm obviously hurt. Blacked out pretty bad. Can't remember how I got here.
What do you remember then?
I was in the pilot seat, dealing with some heat shields, and that's my last living memory.
What the hell? How is this possible? Are you human?
So that was Soma, which came out in September. I didn't write that. I did a load of level design and coding and various other bits and pieces and editing and things, but very small teams, so we all kind of worked on it. But I'm not going to talk about it today, or rather I shall talk about bits of it in reference to what I want to talk about. What I actually want to talk about, because I wanted to talk about it for ages, is this, which is things that I have learned from running around with a rubber sword over the last 25 years. And some things that I've learned from running those games, which I think apply to all sorts of interactive writing and to computer games as well as other things. And you can kind of draw your own conclusions. I'll make a few suggestions. It might spark something. It might be totally irrelevant to what you're doing. So let's see. I'm not a theorist in this particularly. I'm not an academic. What I'm going to talk about is things that I've kind of tried, witnessed, found that work or don't work. I am going to talk about a particular game because I think it's easier frame of reference to use you guys. I'll come to that in a minute. Sorry, James, you've heard some of it already. So, live action role playing. What is it? It's a serious business. More seriously, for those who don't know what live action role playing is, it kind of evolved from things like Dungeons and Dragons back in the late 70s, early 80s. It's kind of like an adult version of Cops and Robbers or Cowboys and Indians, or reenactment without knowing you'll win, which is quite important to me. The key feature really being a bunch of people take on personas. They take on the characters of participants, they dress up and act as those participants. They have a relatively large amount of free will and agency. There is a supporting cast of crew, NPCs who are portraying other characters who are more briefed or scripted that kind of support the story and the plot. There are referees who ask questions. There's a kind of rule structure around it. And there's a range of elaborateness. It might be 4 people around a table in a room somewhere with no real props, or it might be 3,500 people on in a game world that's been going for 10, 20 years that runs 5 weekends a year. You know, there's a huge variance on it. There's a variance of genres. It all kind of started with sword and sorcery. There's still got a little bit about, but there's also, you know, steampunk, Firefly, you name it. There's probably a LARP for it these days. And there's a range of suspension of disbelief. So it could be that you use a complete fake thing as a prop. It could be, you know, a piece of card marked sword, and some games actually do that. And a lot of the time you have to kind of edit out stuff which hasn't been, mentally edit out stuff which isn't part of the world, like somebody's modern tent over there or whatever. But I prefer to kind of work at the higher end of that, which is to try and make sure that everything around you is part of the game world and feels real as much as possible. And it's very, very difficult to record this stuff because a lot of it's going on in people's heads, and the atmosphere and the experience you get out of it is stuff that's happening in your head. And when you see it on camera, it's terrible because you aren't acting to the camera. So we did manage to catch some of this, but not very much, and you'll see why in a second. So this event I want to talk about, we did in January this year. It's called Gold Rush Team Area. It was a 1950s Christmas thing, appropriately, a Christmas ghost story. We hired a mansion on Exmoor and we filled it full of special effects for a weekend and threw some people in to see what would happen. So let's get back to the stunt. This was the starting point for our stunt. It was simply we had a stuntwoman who wanted to jump out of a window. We thought that was a great idea. So the kind of weird thing about this is it led to us writing it backwards, and that's kind of interesting. If we take a look at the room again, so the stunt team said, we'd like to jump out the window. Here, we think this is an appropriate window, you can put the boxes underneath. And we sat down with them and we went, okay, how are we going to do this stunt? And they said, well, our big concern is that the players have free will. We'd already figured out we're going to do it in the middle of the night to freak people out. So the players have free will, so what's to stop them jumping out of bed, wrestling this woman to the ground and interrupting the stunt and getting in the way? I mean, it's not going to hurt her. but she's a stunt woman, they can take it. But it's going to, muck up the gag, really. So somebody came up with the idea, let's put a physical barrier between them and the window. There's a cot in another room. Well, let's put the cot in there and kind of screw it to the floor. Then they can't move it. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to find there. That's fine. Okay, well, that gives us a bit of story. Okay, this woman has a baby. Oh, says somebody, wouldn't it be great if we had that fake out moment where you think you know the gag and it's a fake baby, and then she actually jumps, and that's a great fake out. Okay, she throws the baby out, so what's put her in that state of mind? And the stunt team went, that's not quite enough, that's not enough of a barrier to us. They, particularly now you've got the baby in there, they probably want to get involved. And so somebody goes, oh yeah, the gun. Let's give her a gun. Because that's it's a blank fire, it looks like a real gun. Somebody in that state of mind, that time of the morning, with a gun waved into their face, particularly one they've just heard fired, will probably not get involved. And so the story kind of comes from that. She's just shot somebody. Who she shot? Well, what about her husband? And the whole story kind of comes together from that. So we start distributing these documents all around the house, which are, the betting slips that he's laid on at the local betting shop, the estate that he sold off, and, correspondence, the girl's birth certificate, the couple's death certificates, because this happened about 20 years ago, newspaper reports, all of this stuff all came from the requirements of the stunt. Which is kind of interesting. But the really interesting thing about it is what we've succeeded in doing is we've taken somebody who has complete free choice and we've shut down their options without them knowing that we've shut down their options. If they didn't act during that sequence, they didn't act because they think it was their free choice not to act. Yeah? They were really scared and they didn't act, and afterwards they would be kicking themselves going, oh, I should have got involved, I should have done something, maybe. I mean, they knew she was a ghost at this point, so maybe not. But they think it was their fault and their choice. And we used their own natural inclinations against them. And I suppose the lesson to draw from that, from me, is kind of a really broad one, if this will actually do anything. And it's this kind of simple principle getting inside their heads, because you can do so much from viewing it really carefully from the player's point of view and what the player wants to do at that point. You can predict their behaviour and you can use how most people will behave. I mean, it's much easier in this kind of environment. In a computer game, you're kind of playing the odds because you'll always have idiots who will muck about. But actually, are you writing the game for the idiots who will muck about? Which is a kind of interesting question. And the whole story can flow from this kind of design. And certainly the way that the player interacts with the story. Case in point from Soma is that from kind of getting inside somebody's head is when we first wrote the protagonists, Simon, we had quite a lot of stuff that he was commenting on in the environment as he kind of moved around the place. And then we fairly rapidly realised that if you're in the headspace of a player, the character was seeing things that the player hadn't noticed and calling them out. Or the character was feeling things that the player maybe wasn't feeling, and there was this disconnect going on between the character and the player. So we pulled all those lines out, and actually it's much, much better because of that. And there are still people who say he talks too much. But yeah, that all comes from getting inside the player's head. So let's move on a bit. Is that working? No. Yay. So these LARP events. If you're doing a kind of big ongoing campaign, people tend to pay some money and create their own characters and go along and play their characters. But if you're doing a one-off event like the sort of things we do, which might be over a long weekend, it's kind of critical that the players arrive playing characters who have relationships with other characters, or you don't get drama, because you get drama out of character versus character. So you need kind of shared history, you need goals, aims, plot, that sort of thing. So a lot of, it's a bit like one of the kind of murder mystery weekends that you come across. So a lot of our early games had kind of character briefs that went out to players before the event, which we kind of negotiated with them, and they say things like, you are Gordon, you are a stockbroker from Clevedon, you like fish, you hate broccoli, and you really hate that guy Simon because he dissed you last time, that kind of stuff. So motivation, goals, you're trying to get a commission in the Navy, I don't know, all that kind of stuff. So a very kind of dry sheet. But that worked, and plot kind of came from that. And then our next event we made it a bit more elaborate, put a bit more into it, and it kind of grew from that. And then I went to this one event, which, don't get me wrong, it was a perfectly good event. In fact, it was a really good event. Loads of people enjoyed it. It wasn't my cup of tea, and this is why. You say it's pressing a button, and nothing happened. Before the event, I got my rules, which was 16 pages of rules. And then my character brief, which was 11 pages, background for me. Then I got the kind of brief for the region I lived in, no, my house. Then I got the region that I lived in, Then I got something about, what's that one? Oh, the College of Archmage I belonged to. Then I got something about how I could play an out-of-character game about voting. And then I got my character stats, which was 43 pages. So, not only, I mean, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with this. It was very much a writer's game. But it's not all about the page count, actually. Firstly, it's quite off-putting to receive that wall of text. Secondly, you're kind of, how am I going to remember all this? I mean, I can't carry this to refer to it unless I have a real fake big spell book to kind of, I mean, how's that going to work? And more importantly, more critical, I might get it wrong. These guys have written this thing for me to play, and they've got an idea how it fits into their game world, and they've told me how they want it to be played, and I might get it wrong, and it's kind of like performing a play. It's, and it's not your character. Why are you paying money to play that? How can we make it your character? So off the back of that, we had a chat and we came up with an idea for our next game. And what they did was we negotiated with the players and they kind of said, I want to play a really physical character or a really social character, whatever. And we sent them a one-liner saying, how about this? And they went, yeah, that's fine. Or, that sounds terrible. And we reworked it and sent it back again. And then the first thing that they got, as I lose my connection, was this, which I realise you can't read, but it's an in-character invitation to a Christmas party, a family Christmas party. It's got your character name at the top, it's got a bunch of stuff about the event that's happening in character, it's got a little thing about a Secret Santa, and it's got a message from your old Uncle Godfrey written on it, who's the guy inviting you. Okay, cool. Nothing particularly special about that. Then a two-page gossip column magazine which told you about the family that you were part of and the kind of public knowledge about it. Then we sent some rules, and that was only 4 pages. Because we don't like rules that much. Then just a kind of who's who guide. They all sent in photographs so they'd recognise each other, and that was fine. And then, for each character, we did this. Each character, I think the maximum number of documents we sent out to one character was something like 43. Average was around 25, something like that. Which is also a huge amount of stuff and quite daunting. And in there you've got stuff like photos of ex-lovers, your national identity card which has who you are, where you live, your occupation, that kind of thing. Letters that you have had sent to you by other characters, and they've got letters that you've sent to them. Books, I mean, this person here was a pilot, so there were maps of the places that she used to fly, her routes, that kind of thing. Postcards, just a whole load of random stuff. Now, the difference is, firstly, obviously it's all in character. An interesting thing about it all being in character is if you do forget it, you can take it all with you and you can always go back through it to refer to things, which, is not a small thing. And we hope that when you open the packet, it's not a daunting wall of text. Instead, it's a kind of joyful discovery. It's almost like a jigsaw puzzle, putting together all these references, seeing how they all hang together. And the documents, because we've told them, can you take this along to the event? Well, we have blackmail material in a bunch of these that they had on other people. So suddenly they become part of the game. These things actually become part of the game and are kind of key part of it. But the most important thing about it is that nowhere in this did we tell people how they felt about anything. What we've got here is maybe a gossip column saying how the world thinks you are, how the world sees you, or letters from people saying how they think about you, but nowhere did we say, and you thought this about this. So that leaves gaps for the player to bring whatever they want to into the character and decide how their character feels and what they're like. And we found it made a huge difference to the kind of emotional connection between the player and the character. And it kind of surprised us quite how deep that went, actually. And I think the thing that I took out of it, and we've taken out a few things, is this notion of leaving gaps. If you're writing something interactive, you leave gaps, which led me to things like remembering this. I don't know if anybody's come across Scott McCloud's book, Understanding Comics, absolutely fantastic. Highly recommend it. His thing about gaps is what happens in the gutter between 2 panels in a comic, because that's where the reader's imagination takes over, and it's entirely up to them, in their head, what happens between those 2 moments. Which is kind of fascinating. And then there's a guy called Alexis Kennedy who runs a game called Fallen London. I don't know if anybody's come across. He has this theory which he calls fires in the desert, and it's something that they use for their game. They give their story, which is a text-based kind of MMO, almost, I suppose, kind of, little kind of droplets of story, but they don't define how those droplets connect up And it's entirely up to the player to work out what their character was doing in those spaces between stories. And again, it's kind of leaving gaps. And the same is true of books. I mean, well-written books tend to be really light on description. They don't go, he was 6 foot tall with piercing green eyes. That's quite amateurish fiction. They actually leave an awful lot for the player to run in their own head, which weirdly is kind of very interactive. Films do it less, they kind of do it between cuts. Adventure games, I was playing the last chapter of Dreamfall the other day, and there's a couple of brilliant moments in there where the characters get from one place to another place with an extra pack animal and a whole load of fake masks and stuff like that. And they kind of go on about this little thing that happened, but they don't give you any detail. It totally leaves it to your imagination as to how they got there. Then the real classic one on Monkey Island, that bizarre surreal fight in Monkey Island where he's doing something with wax toenail clippings off camera entirely. It's entirely up to you what the hell happened there. I remove rhinoceros hooves with a staple gun, and it's, you know, but so I think that's kind of what I've taken away from it really is leave gaps for them to fill. And older games were much better at this because their graphics was terrible. Text games, brilliant for it. Even something like Eye of the Beholder, I remember sitting in my university halls with a mate with kind of 4 character portraits, and we're having the characters argue with each other. And you know, that never happened in the game, it was entirely in our heads. As we've got more and more cinematic with games, I think it's fallen away a bit. And it doesn't mean, if you leave those gaps, I think you get a much stronger emotional connection. It doesn't mean that you can't define the character. I mean, you've got things like Indiana Jones or Nathan Drake or something like that. You are feeling empathy for that character. It's like a film. It's like a TV program. You're seeing that part of that character in third person, and there's empathy going on. Some people, like for example, BioWare, play with that by letting you customize the character, which I think gives you a bit of a stronger connection. Obviously, things like dialogue trees also let you, in some way, kind of customize the character. And it means that when we come to something like Soma, where we're desperately trying to make the person inhabit the body, we try to make Simon, the protagonist, a blank slate as much as we possibly can, and that's really difficult to do. I think that's probably... Yeah, so that's what I took away from that. So let's move on a bit. How do we get from the real world into our game world? And in particular for this event, how did we do that? Beforehand, this is all about state of mind. This is how do you drag the player kicking and screaming into the state of mind that you want to have the effect you want to have on them. So beforehand we sent out a kind of booking form and said, you know, who are you, name and address, all that kind of stuff. What are your phobias and anything which you don't want us to mention because it might trigger something? And yes, we wanted to know that because we didn't want to screw anybody over. Oh, I did, but nobody else would. But equally, it starts the person thinking, well, what are my phobias? What will I be really scared of? And it's a common thing in live role-playing to have combat rules. Most games were like that. We knew ours wasn't going to have that. You can't hurt ghosts. Ghosts were ethereal. Some of them didn't take any physical form. But we put combat rules in because then the players thought that they could be hurt. Yeah. We also put in a safe word. We genuinely, as a crew, we never discussed what would happen if anybody used it. But we put it in there to make people think, how bad could it get that I need to use a safe word? Yeah. Similarly, we told them there will be no breaks. As soon as you step into your character, for 48 hours, you will not stop being that character. There is never a point, even when you're asleep in bed, there's never a point when you will be out of character. And there will be no safe spaces. Even bathrooms, we won't spy on you in a bathroom, but anything can happen at any time, anywhere. And it's all kind of the throw them off balance. So when they turned up at this building, which is nice and sunny. It's a little lodge right at the end of the road from the house itself. They park up there, we get them into the lodge and we get them into their 1950s clothing and their 1950s luggage. We had music playing in the background as we did it, which was modern horror music actually, kicking off in the background, just a kind of low tone, just kind of grumble to set them a little bit off edge. And the light went down, and then as they were about ready to get going, I took each person individually into a room and I took a photograph of them with their eyes closed. I also gave them a deck of Arthurian tarot and I got them to draw a card from that, look at it, and I wrote down what that was, and we said no more about it. There was no reason for me to do either of those things. Nothing at all. It's entirely to set people off balance, going, what the hell's going on? What are they doing? I mean, we had people thinking, oh, if I do the eyes closed, is it going to be my picture in a morgue? Yeah. So entirely it's just to throw them off balance. And then we threw them into the dark, in small groups. It was a lot darker than this. Up a road, the in-character excuse was that their car there'd been flooding and the car from the station hadn't managed to get past the flood, so they had to get out, despite the fact they were posh, and carry their baggage up through the dark, along this dark road, with the FX crew having set off fog along either side of the thing, and then there's a lantern approaching them in the darkness. It's one of the members of staff will take them down to the house, which is pitch dark because there's been a power cut. And the staff had set out candles, and they kind of welcomed people in the front room, and they gave them mulled wine and that kind of thing. You leave your bag in the hall, and after a little bit, a member of staff would come up, tap you on the shoulder, and say, "Yeah, your room's ready now." And they would take you in one and twos with a candle, a single candle, up the most circuitous route they can possibly find, into the darkest corners of the mansion that you have never seen before, up really creaky long corridors, and they leave you in your room on your own with the candle. And then you discover that the servants had unpacked your baggage. And the interesting thing about that, there's kind of three things really. The first thing is that immediately throws you into the kind of 1950s mansion, house in the country mindset. Oh, that's the kind of thing they do. Oh yeah, I better be in that mode. Secondly, it's a violation. It's a violation of the player. Somebody's just gone through your things. It's also a violation of the character, because we know we planted a load of blackmail material in those bags. Yeah? We didn't nick anything, but it starts you thinking. So the whole thing's just to set everyone off balance. And obviously we decorated the whole house with all sorts of stuff going on. One of the characters is an author, so we just made up a bunch of fake penguin books that he'd written. We had radios, which obviously didn't work in the power cut, but came on later, which had MP3 players in them, which had like a 48-hour looped MP3. So if you turned them on at any point, you would get the right radio for 1954 Christmas, including the Queen's speech. We had photos of their ancestors, and the reason they knew there were photos of their ancestors is we'd actually nicked photos of the players off Facebook and photoshopped them into oil paintings. so the cool thing about that is you never had to explain to them who those photos were. Yeah? Never had to brief them. They just knew that they must be ancestors. Yeah? We had a phone system, because obviously the first thing that happens when you find a dead body is you find a police. So we built a fake phone system that actually connected to a kind of referee's room on the other side, and the butler would bring you the phone and say, "Oh, you want to call, please, sir?" And somebody at the other end would pretend to be the policeman. "Sorry, we can't get there, there's floods in the way," that kind of thing. So we gave them that connection to the outside world. And the radio would do the same. It would do the weather reports and that kind of thing. So we kind of set the scene. And then we had some stooges, because this is a good way to do this kind of thing in this kind of game, is you want to have some handles on the story you can prod and push and whatever. You want to have some characters that can turn up dead without ruining a paying player's event, really. Yeah. So we had 3 or 4 of those, and this one in particular I want to talk about. This was played by somebody called Rebecca South. She was playing a character called Aunt Sophie, and the thing about Aunt Sophie is we'd written her into all the background, in all the letters that people get in their packs, as this terribly supportive character. All of the players had something terribly wrong. They all had problems they were trying to solve, and she would write really supportive things like, "Oh, it's all right, I'll help you through this. I've got a plan, we can sit down and talk about it." It'd be really, really comforting. And the player was late, so we sent all the other players in. And then at about 10:30, there was a phone call across our fake phone system for the Lord of the Manor saying, "I've got terrible news. Sophie Northmore, I'm afraid she was cycling on the canal in Oxford and slipped and fell in the canal. I'm afraid she's dead." And this person never existed. The Facebook person on Facebook who'd been talking to them about costume and really excited about the event never existed. We just made her up. I have no idea who that photo is. Not a clue. And the reason we did that is it ripped out the support rug under probably a good third of the characters. Their emotional support was suddenly gone and they were on their own. And it's all about getting them to a point where they are totally unbalanced by what's going on. Obviously, that's for a horror event, it's a very specific thing. But the kind of wider point, I think, rather than immersion, I think drowning is a better way to put it. Dragging them, kicking and screaming into the mood you want them. Horror games are really good at this. I mean, obviously, lots of games are good at it from the point of view of sound, from the point of view of environmental storytelling, from the art. But I think that can go a little bit further than it does in a lot of cases. I think you can take any opportunity, and it's where you get really well designed, even just loading screens and start menus and all that kind of stuff, but also when you start looking at things like the UI. We did things with Soma where we're trying to have a minimal UI. A good example would be to try and take something like health meters and all that kind of stuff and throw it into the world. If you've played Dead Space, where all of that stuff is actually part of Isaac Clarke's suit, and all becomes part of the game world, to me, the more, and it is a kind of game I like, but the more you try and make it all part of the world around them, the more it kind of connects them to the character of the world. And another thing, obviously, from Amnesia and from the Soma, is the idea that instead of pressing a button to open the door, pressing a button on the gamepad to open the door, you grab it and you pull it. And just little things like that can kind of bind them into the world. Don't force it if it won't go, but Metal Gear Solid, if anybody's played Metal Gear Solid, the moment where Psycho Mantis says about the types of games that you enjoy playing, because the program read your save games on the machine. I mean, those kind of little left field curves are brilliant if you can throw that kind of stuff in. I'll probably leave it later. So, quickly on, it can't be real. There was one player who was a society photographer, and we gave her up front this 1950s camera, which is actually an iPhone case with an iPhone in it, because we wanted her to be able to capture images during the game. Because, as I said, putting a camera person in there and taking photos really kind of gets in the way. So let's do it in character. And we told her up front, we gave her as a freebie, we said there will be a dark room in the building. When you find it, if you want to develop any photos, find a ref, go in there, give us the memory card, we'll go away and print them and give them back to you. Which is fine, it's a nice way of kind of developing. So I lost my connection again. So here's some of the photos. A rather scary maid. A gravestone that was out in the woods, which we'll talk more of at some point. Some toffs going for a walk. You get some idea of the size of the mansion. A scary couple of rocking horses in one of the kind of upstairs rooms. Another shot of the upstairs children's room. Can anybody see? If you look top left, they probably weren't there when she took the photo, those figures. And here's a much more explicit one. Because we obviously had Photoshop sitting on our computer and we have and we could drop them in so that when they started looking at the photos, they found this kind of thing. So, but the interesting thing about this one is who is she? And they knew who she was as soon as they saw the photo. Because of some background that we planted, but also when they first arrived, and a couple of people got into one room and they opened a wardrobe and they found this. A bunch of old clothes and a whole lot of photos of this woman. Her name was Annette Northmore. She was a silent movie star who got very depressed after the talkies came in for various reasons because her career had kind of ended and she committed suicide in the bath in this place. And they knew that history because some of them had stuff about her in, oh bugger off, in the pack. So some of them had cards and letters and whatever from this character who died a few years ago. So it was when they were much, much younger. There were envelopes lying around the house, fan letters to her which had never been opened because somebody had been hiding the letters from her fans and from her agents, so she thought she'd been abandoned and so she committed suicide, and that was all kind of part of the story. And then in our world, she'd been in the movie Nosferatu, F.W. Murnau's movie. So we got hold of a copy of it and we put her into it. And then we took shots of our actress, video of our actress, and we spliced her into the movie. And there was a bunch of film reels and a room downstairs, and they could say to the butler, oh, I'd like to watch that movie, please. And he would put that movie in, whatever the movie was, a bunch of old films. And one of them was this. And so we kind of placed her in the world. So as soon as they saw that photograph, they knew who it was. And some were already quite emotionally attached to her. And then, kind of late at night, you'll see something a little bit like this. This was a test in my front room, but it should give you the idea. And it was silent, because silent movie interest. So, the thing about this is they would see that along a dark corridor where there wasn't a place for it to be projected, because we'd have a temporary couple of sheets of gauze which came out, and actually if you put 2 sheets about that distance away, somehow it looks 3D, it's quite weird. It couldn't exist where it was, and they knew who it was and they treated it as a character rather than a projection because they were kind of in that mindset. And what we're doing with it is it's like a magic trick, it's like stage magic. And exactly the same with the jumping out the window. It's not something that could possibly happen. Yeah, jump out a window, it doesn't happen. It's stage magic. And it kind of goes back to one of our kind of almost founding principles, which is this. Which is probably a bit overstated. It should actually be emotionally affect the player, not the character. But scare is easier to talk about. So, I suppose the simplest example I could take is something like Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is scared of snakes. If I'm playing a game with Indiana Jones, which probably isn't a horror, to be fair, he comes across some snakes. And we know Indy is scared of snakes, and so that's a barrier to him, he can't get past them. I'm not scared of snakes. I can understand that he is, so there's empathy there, but I'm not having the same emotional, visceral reaction about snakes. If it's height, absolutely, I'm right there with him, but that's snakes. And that gag was written to scare the character and not scare the person playing the game. And there's no way you can write a game that will address everybody's innate fears, unless you've collected a list of their phobias beforehand, of course. But what you can do is, if you're planning a scary game, don't make it all about snakes. Try and hit a bunch of standard... it's the same really about writing story, is if you can concentrate on a kind of visceral, basic emotions and feelings which you apply to a majority of people, then you're much more likely to affect a majority of people, and that's kind of important. I'll skip forward really. Yeah, I mean, I suppose Soma again as an example. When we were writing Soma, we weren't writing it for jump scares really for the player, we weren't writing it to affect Simon. The image that we always had in our heads is of somebody at home, after they've stepped away from the game console, lying in bed thinking, oh, what the hell? How did that work? How does that come together? And that's actually the audience we were trying to affect. We were trying to get that effect on people. So it's just a way of thinking about it, really. Vincit omnia veritas. Truth overcomes all. When we prepped this event, we sent out a bunch of wooden Christmas decorations to everybody, which had their name on and the family motto, Vincit omnia veritas. And really, it was the solution to the whole plot. It told them everything they needed to know to solve the game on these things they got in their packs, or they didn't realise that at the time. But the theme of the event, which this kind of solves, was reconciliation. Everything we did in this event was about reconciliation. So the whole long plot arc of the kind of 48 hours was about that. But also each ghost's individual story, and we had kind of 7 or 8 different setups of ghosts, were all to do with reconciliation, and the character's own problems were all to do with reconciliation. And when we look at Soma, everything in this game was to do with what does it mean to be human. Everything reinforced that theme. All the little sub-stories, the big stories, the letters, the notes, all the rest of it. Now, both of these things had really amazing reviews for their story. But actually, their stories are, I won't say bollocks, but there's huge plot holes in both. For God Rest You Merry, running a live action event is quite disjoint, actually, and there's a whole bunch of things that don't quite make sense if you sit down and think about it in any depth. Same goes for Soma, and it's no fault of the writers, it's the way this kind of game comes together. There are huge diversions at the end, and you have to write yourself into little tangled corners, and actually, if anybody sat down and thought about it too hard, there's some real issues. But we still got plaudits for story, and I think plaudits are for the wrong thing. I think because the themes are so strong in both of them, and we've made sure we've reflected them, that kind of carries people away. And when you get people coming back from a cinema experience and going, oh, so many plot holes in that, I hated that film. Had they resonated with the story which had been there, they would almost certainly have not noticed that there were any plot holes. The plot holes are their excuse for why they didn't like it, but they're not the reason that they didn't like it. We had one player at the end of God Rest You Merry, came to us and said, I could kind of feel when I was on the right track. It kind of clicked. And I didn't feel railroaded. It's not like you were making me do a thing, but I could feel when I was kind of in tune with the story, and that's never really happened before. So my takeaway from this really is if we focus on the theme, then, and make sure that everything in the game, again, talking computer games, menus and sound and audio and all this kind of stuff, and all your environmental storytelling is trying to reflect that theme. And it can be difficult. I mean, when you set out to write a novel, you tend to write first draft, and then at the end of the first draft you go, well, that's what I was telling the story about. And then you go back through, you find, having found that theme, you go back through and you polish your second draft so it does match that theme. And it's can be very difficult to come up with a theme beforehand, but it's certainly better than having no theme at all. So I strongly encourage you to find the theme and go for it, because it seems to work. They had a tank. This is a phrase which comes back to haunt us, because we ran a game a number of years ago where we had a tank, or what people thought was a tank, but was actually some plywood and some cunning pyrotechnics. But it kind of passed into legend to the point where people still tell us about the fact that somebody had this World War I tank up a hill by a castle, and they think it was real somehow. And these are what I term war stories. They're things that people go down the pub and they talk about for a long time afterwards. And exactly the same happens in computer games on forums. That bit when, yeah? And that reaction in a way is kind of what I mean all of these things to do. It's for a player to go, that moment, it needn't be fear, it can just be, my God, that can't be happening. And again, it calls back to the magic tricks. It's the thing which can't possibly happen, and they've just, you've actually affected them and not their character. And I think we found it's very successful to write our games as a series of these moments. They're not really set pieces, some of them are set pieces, but the moments could be tiny moments of emotion. They needn't be huge grand explosions and things like that. Michael Bay, take note. But what we found as a successful thing is to take a bunch of these moments, we just sit around, we brainstorm, because wouldn't it be great if, like the jumping out the window stuff, typical case in point. And then when we've got those moments, we write a story that connects them all together. And what we've kind of found is it doesn't matter how good your writing is between those spaces, actually. It can be rubbish. Because people gloss over and forget and those fade, but the moments that they talk about for years afterwards and the moments they really remember and exaggerate are those particular war stories, those particular points. And again, I kind of advocate that that's not a bad thing to think about when you're writing a computer game, is to think about, I want to get them in that mood or that feeling, or I want them to be a bit where they have to crawl up a slope by their fingernails, or like the set pieces in Uncharted or something like that, which is kind of been designed like that. And then don't worry so much about the connecting tissue, it kind of takes care of itself. If you lift the quality of the connecting tissue, that's great, the game will be fantastic. But if you have the connecting tissue without those moments, then it won't live in people's memories. Again, Michael Bay, take note. And also, it doesn't matter if not everybody sees those moments. It took me for ages to learn this. We ran one event where we blew a whole bunch of budget on one particular effect and 6 people saw it. And I was really disappointed afterwards. And it wasn't until a few years later I realised it didn't matter, because those people had talked about that thing to everybody because they'd been there and they'd seen that thing. And it kind of grown into a legend. In a computer case, that's fine, actually, because it'll spread onto forums and Easter eggs. Case in point, exactly the same thing. And the news will spread and people will find it. So don't worry if it's without blowing your budget on additional content, don't worry if not everybody is going to get to see that moment. I think that's probably it. So I've been talking about this game, God rest you Mary. I haven't told you about a whole bunch of stuff. I haven't covered any of the other ghosts. I haven't told you about how we use Oculus Rift, flame bars and setting people on fire, puppeted monsters, audio effects. We had these vibration speakers which made tables shake and windows shake, 3D sounds which you could puppet around spaces, smells. I managed to buy online a can of something called Burned Witch, which was fantastic. Or Underground Wartime was another one. That gravestone that you saw grew a face and started talking to people. And there was a bricked up wall with a body behind somewhere in the basement. So there's a whole lot of other stuff. Feel free to go to that site where I've written a load about it, what went wrong, what went right, all that kind of stuff, if you're interested in any further. I'd also suggest you play that if you haven't, because it's quite fun. We've really enjoyed making it. And a quick plug for something I released about a week ago, which is text only, so plenty of room for your imagination. It's kind of a digital choose your own adventure book, I guess. There's a very strong theme in that. If anybody can find it, that would be cool. I've been me. There we go. Any questions?
Any questions?
How many people was this run for? How many
This
paying customers?
This particular one, I think there are only 25 paying customers. I mean, we've our biggest ones were probably 100 odd. We've been involved in games which we've had like 3,500 people on site, but not obviously not one team writing for all of those people. It kind of pyramids out a whole bunch. But yeah, this sort of scale of event tends to be 50 or below. We like running it small, but it means our budgets are a bit constrained because, Ready? Okay.
Give them a second because the stream lag. Someone's got to have some more questions.
When you're designing these games, do you have any fail-safes in case people really don't do what you want them to do? Like if they do something completely off the wall?
Yeah, I mean, the linearity of these games is an interesting thing. We put quite a lot of effort into building these set pieces, but we don't necessarily say when they will happen. Yeah, and so a lot of things we do on site at the time is have a panicked meeting at about 3 a.m. on the Saturday, going, "Oh shit, they've done this. How do we get around that? How do we steer things?" And this is why we have the supporting cast, because we can push out a maid servant to go and say something particular, like they hid that thing you're looking for. It's over there. I saw them, Gov. Or that's also why we have the stooges in place. And some games don't do that, they're much more purist about that, but I prefer to give people a kind of experience, so that's how we do it. So, for example, there was a stooge sitting right up there. He came to a horrible fiery death at the end of Saturday night, which we kind of left him in there as somebody who might horribly die, or might not horribly die, but we needed him to horribly die. Yeah. So, some things we very much plan out. The nice thing about running a Christmas event, actually, weirdly, is that it self-schedules, because people know what happens around Christmas. They know that on Christmas Eve you might have some carol singers. They know on Christmas Day you get up, you have your what's the orange and champagne thing, that thing, and you open your presents, and there's the Queen's speech at midday, and then there's the meal. So that's quite nice because it's self-scheduling and people kind of understand how it's all going to hang together. But really, it very much depends on the event. There are timed things you can make happen. We can prod things with a game like this. We can prod them with things like the radio. We can prod them with a phone call. But really, you need to leave yourself when you're designing these games a whole bunch of levers to press and pull to kind of operate it. Obviously, totally different from computer games, unless you've got an MMO with a dedicated story team, and those things are rare and really expensive. So, up top there.
Yeah, I'm just sort of piggybacking off that last question. Earlier you said that once they step through the doors, they're in character.
Yeah.
And yet you're trying to scare them and surprise them and do all sorts of things. How do you rely on them staying in character when you're surprising them and scaring them?
Well, the main way that we do it is by attempting, whatever my point was, maybe 3 or whatever, is by attempting to immerse them so much in the game world that they can't help it. That's just, they are their character. There's no kind of, and actually there's this weird thing where you get into this kind of state where you are that character, and then actually it can be quite hard to break out of it afterwards. And the more emotional an event has been, actually the harder it is to break out of it. And there's all kind of psychology, Nordic LARP professional study about the bleed effect, which is your character spilling into your, you go to work the next day and you find yourself bowing to the boss when he gives you a question. It can be a bit embarrassing, but genuinely there are methods you can use, the psychological methods you can use to kind of unbind people again at the end. Like actors, when actors have performed, there are ways you can take them out of being an actor back to being a character, back to being an actor, which you tend to have to use if 2 people have been having a love affair for the film and you don't want there to be problems afterwards. Genuinely, people use that kind of technique. We don't, because we want people to go away from this event going, oh, I've still got that in my head. But mostly during the event, we do it by doing everything we can to make everything they see around them real and concrete and all part of the game world, if we can possibly do that.
Thank you.
Was the ghost jumping out the window a success? Nobody interfered when you ran?
No, nobody interfered. The only thing which didn't really work, which is a real shame, was that they were all too scared to run to the window and look out. So we kind of lost that bit, but never mind. I mean, obviously by the time anybody investigated it was all gone, but they were just too scared and they just ran away.
So, was this a one-off event, or do you do this yearly?
This was a one-off event. Our small group really don't like repeating ourselves, because we like to throw all of the cliches and tropes that we possibly can at one experience, and then how do you do a sequel? But there are all sorts of events running all over the world all the time of various genres. Our stuff is very far and few between these days because it takes an awful lot of effort to do, like those packs that you saw and all the special effects and things. Some people will run 4 or 5 a year, so there's quite a lot of them out there. And a lot of them are ongoing connected stories. Ours don't tend to be, because we kind of gone, right, something else. Yeah. I think you
I kind of the same question if it's a one-off event, but more in the sense of not if there's a sequel, but do you do it multiple times with different players?
No. Again, you could do, and it's a saving on props and all the rest of it, but we're all kind of doing this really as a hobby. It's not making any money. If I was doing it commercially, I would do that because it makes perfect sense. But again, it's like a theatre performance. I think we all throw all of our effort at it. And also, by the time we get to day 3, the special effects team have probably demolished a prop that they wanted on day 1, because they suddenly thought, oh, let's build this, and they've built it by day 3. So actually, it can be quite difficult to go back on ourselves in some cases. But yeah, we kind of, all the energy comes out of the first burst, and I think if we were to do it again, we would get jaded, and you wouldn't get the same level of engagement, really.
About the people that are the players, do they regularly do this, or are they used to play such real life games? And do they know each other before they come to the...
It depends. Our games, they tend to, because there are a whole bunch of people we've known for a very long time who follow what we do, and as soon as we go, we're releasing another event, the tickets just go. So by default, they tend to be people that we know. But we've had, over the years, all manner of people taking part. It kind of helps if people have played these a bit before, just because they kind of get the drift of how it all works. And but again, we try and be so immersive with these things that it'll be very easy to pick up, and everybody around you will be kind of doing the same thing. But there are a bunch of kind of more general public-facing things, such as anybody's been to a Punch Drunk performance, for example. Anybody know who Punch Drunk is? Theatre company? Yeah. The Drowned Man and those kind of things. Those are amazing. If you get a chance to see a Punch Drunk event, go to one. They take over something like a big building next to Paddington or the Battersea Arts Centre, decorate the entire thing with environmental storytelling in character. You go in there as a member of the audience. You can't really interact with things, but you can pick up at things and look at things and piece stories together, and then actors will be doing things around you. So it's less interactive, but that same sense of immersion is there, and it's fantastic. Well worth going to.
Another, sorry.
No, go on.
Another question. So, when you're calling it a game, does it mean you as a player have some kind of target or goal that you have to achieve, or is it just spending time?
That's an interesting question. Some games are more rules heavy than other games, like tabletop role playing, and actually like a bunch of computer games, whether you're managing, micromanaging stats or not. And it really depends on the player. Some people will play it because they want to build up their character and get to certain things. The sort of thing we run tends not to be like that, because we're so story-based and because I hate rules. So we tend to strip the rules back. So that you don't have to stop, flip out of character and think about game mechanics. That's the main reason I hate them, is it kind of it interferes with your immersion. So we just put a really light touch set of rules in. But that's not to say there aren't other goals. People probably have character goals. So by the end of this event particularly, every character started off with a severe, probably psychological or financial problem of some sort, or blackmail or whatever problem. And their in-character goal, although never stated, it was kind of in the documents, would be to get rid of that problem. And if you don't give them those problems, there's kind of no drama to the character. Yeah. So there's a statistics-based, rules-based goal that some of these games enable people to take part in, get a +5 sword or whatever, or become king of the world. But there's also very much kind of character personal goals, and it's up to you as a player what you want to do. But for this kind of event, you're probably not going to get a +5 sword. At the back.
Yeah, I have a question. How do you deal with the game breakers, with people who don't accept the roles, that don't get into the role well? Do you punish them in game, or do you just pick them?
In all honesty, we've never really attracted them, and I think it's maybe because we are so rules-light. It tends to be self-enforcing in the sort of games that we run, because again, everybody's kind of playing with the atmosphere, and it's catchy, it's kind of addictive. In bigger events, you just kind of put up with it. There's lots of kind of big events where people will not be playing the same game as you, they'll be maybe playing at a different level as you, maybe a bit more out of character, as you say, maybe breaking the immersion. And what I was talking about right at the beginning is that suspension of disbelief. And if you like a hardcore player who's very much into the game, very immersed, you tend to blank those people out. You tend to treat you and the people you were playing with as one game, and the other 1,000 people over there as supporting cast, backdrop, passers-by on the street. And so it almost self-organises into groups of players who like playing the same kind of way. Yeah. You've had your hand up several times.
It's arguably the same thing. My own impression, has anybody ever got to the point where they have to break out a character because they can't cope anymore?
With this game in particular, that business I was talking about crossing the threshold, about winding them up and getting to the point where they were so scared that they couldn't do anything. We had one player go home on Friday night. He got to the dark mansion and he couldn't cope. And it was just, that was it. And he decided he couldn't do it anymore. To be fair, this is a guy who I've known scare himself sitting on a sofa telling a ghost story. So it kind of was his own, and he said up front, I never should have booked for this thing. I get scared every occasion, and sorry, it's entirely my own fault. So fair enough.
Did you work that into the story?
Yeah. His body was dragged out to the river. Half later, which of course mentally affected his sister, who was one of the characters. Yeah, so you can pick up and run with any of these things, really.
It was really good that he left.
It was a shame. we'd made up all those fake books for him. So. One more.
No matter how much you plan, there can always be something that happens you didn't anticipate. And you mentioned that in some cases you can sit down at, 3 a.m. and discuss what to do. But sometimes I guess you're not given the luxury. For example, some of the supporting cast have to react immediately. Do you prepare them in any way for situations you can't anticipate?
There's a bunch of ways we deal with this. The main reason is really, really simple. We don't script our supporting cast. We give them, almost like we gave these characters, we give them a full background, we give them a full briefing, but they are playing people and they react as if they were people. And we know that we only get crew now who we know very well and we know what they can cope with and we know how they can react. So we put a lot of trust in those people. For us, they're as much part of the story team as anybody else. And so we trust them to take snap decisions, and then we can sort out any problem afterwards. We can always improvise our way out of a paper bag at the end of it. So yeah, that's really the main supporting mechanism. That's probably it. Yes, or occasionally we will not set off the pyrotechnic effect when somebody's just landed on it. That kind of decision we can take. That's probably...
Final question?
One more.
Do you provide, either at the end of 48 hours in person or afterwards, say online, an opportunity for the characters to debrief?
Yeah, actually what we did for this one is we had, I think, 2 nights, but maybe 3 nights in character. And then the final night, we actually said, we'll stay over an extra night in the venue, out of character, everybody can chill out, debrief, not have to drive home after having had no sleep for 2 days. And kind of tell each other stories. And because we don't see everything that happens, it's really nice to sit there and listen to their stories and hear what they're experiencing. And again, the war stories thing. Did you see that bit? That's kind of what we're in this for. And if we weren't there at the time when it happened, it's lovely to hear about it at some point. So it's as much a debrief to us as it is to them. But absolutely, we do everything we can to do that. And again, Facebook groups and all the rest of that after the fact. Okay.
Great. Ian, Thomas, thank you very much.